Hello there. Welcome back to the Star Bros podcast. I'm your host, Lamont. Thank you for tuning in this evening or this morning, whatever time you're watching. But regardless, thank you for joining us. Of course, I'm joined by my co-host, Roland.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I am fantastic.
That's good. How's your week been?
It's been good. I had my birthday, spoilt rotten.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. My girlfriend took me to the NASA exhibition, which was really cool.
That would have been cool.
Yeah, it's been in Brisbane since March. I recommend everyone check it out. It's only got a week left. I think it finishes, or it's got 2 weeks left. Go and check it out, guys.
I'll have to go
South
check it
Bank,
out.
Brisbane.
Yeah, we've been too lazy to go, to be
Do
honest.
it.
Yeah, do it. Give in to your hatred. Anyway, guys, thanks for joining in again. We are going to go through some news today. Not a lot had happened up until recently. Got a bit of juiciness coming our way.
Sweet juiciness.
From the maker himself, George Lucas. Bit of heavy news, I guess.
Just quickly, what are your thoughts
Absolutely.
on good old George?
What are my thoughts?
Yeah.
I'm about to actually elaborate on that.
Elaborate away.
Yeah. My thoughts on George. Can't thank him enough for creating a thing I love. To put it into a sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
He's a dude.
He is a dude.
He is a dude. George Lucas is a dude.
Don't you feel sorry for George?
I do. Sort of. I'm going to get into this. This first piece of news that we've got going. So for those of you who don't know, I actually do recommend that you read up on this a bit. I'm going to summarize what happened, and I'll actually leave a link in the description for you to do some further reading, because there is quite a bit to read into. But pretty much, Disney CEO Bob Iger has written a memoir, and he's pretty much written about his time as being Disney CEO in the last 15 years. Obviously, these last 15 years for Disney have been huge. They've created the biggest cinematic universe, movie universe we've ever seen, which is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Huge. They've just had Avengers Endgame come out this past year. They have revived the Star Wars community with brand new Star Wars movies, which we thought we were never going to get again. And they've also had countless top box office movies come out on top of that. So he has been part of all of that. And I suppose we have him to thank for, giving us all these great movies that we've had, and we've been very, very spoilt as movie fans, especially over the past decade. But he, obviously, you can't talk about the last 15 years in Disney without mentioning Star Wars. And mentioning Star Wars, he did. He actually delved into talking about his experience with George Lucas during the acquisition of Lucasfilm back in 2012, and also his relationship with him through the development of The Force Awakens and so forth. I guess this is actually really the first time as the public we've actually been allowed to know this.
Well, it's the first time anything's ever been confirmed.
So pretty much, to summarize it all up, Bob Iger and George Lucas have never really seen eye to eye, because when George Lucas sold these movies to Bob Iger, pretty much what happened is, Bob Iger was like, look, we want to do Star Wars, and of course, if you want Star Wars, you're going to pressure him into selling it to you. To cut a long story short, George Lucas had sold his baby, I guess you could call it, for just a short amount of $4 billion. Right, it's just pocket change.
Yeah.
No worries at all. It's just pocket change. Yeah. Very important to keep in mind that George Lucas did willingly sell his Star Wars.
His soul? Oh,
his
yeah,
soul.
Star Wars, right.
His soul, yes. He willingly did it. He signed the paper, and that's that. Along with this, he also sold his scripts that he had written for a sequel trilogy that Disney could use if they had chose to. There was nothing contractually to say that they had to use these scripts. But pretty much what happened is, fast forward to the development of The Force Awakens, where JJ, Kathleen, and there was...
We should say actually, just to that, is that my understanding is that Disney acquired Lucasfilm.
Yeah.
then in addition to that, separate to that acquisition,
Yeah.
they actually purchased George Lucas's original sequel trilogy treatment and story ideas separately to the acquisition of the Star Wars
that was separate
franchise. Yeah. So, and it also should be said too that yes, this was so George Lucas agreed to sell his story treatment for his trilogy to Bob Iger and Disney.
Yeah.
And Bob Iger read these, like the story treatments for these 3 films, and then asked to purchase it off of him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So George actually gave a script out to, it was Bob Iger, and I think it was Kathleen, and I think it was someone else. And
it wasn't Kathleen, it was the...
it was someone else at the time,
it was someone else, 2 other people at the time that were prominent in Disney.
Yeah. All right. So they read the script anyway, and they were like, look, we'll buy it anyway. But from what I can understand, or at least this is what Bob Iger says, is that George was very clear on the fact that there was nothing contractual about having to use those scripts in order to create the next sequel trilogy.
Well, Bob, this is the trickery, is we'll get into this, right? Because so George Lucas actually let them read it. After Bob Iger read it, then he was like, okay, we want to buy your treatments. Yes. However, George, we're going to buy them off you, but we're not contractually obligated to use your ideas or story threads. So they bought his story knowing essentially that they weren't going to use those stories for their trilogy, which is kind of snaky. I think.
I mean, the thing is, right, is that if George was aware of this, he signed it. He sold them. He's his own man. He can make his own decisions. The fact of it is that he sold it. If they made it clear that they weren't, if Bob sat him down and just pretend you're George, like, all right, George, I may or may not use these. We're not contractually obligated to use these, but we're happy to buy them off you.
I don't think. Look, I don't think that's the way the conversation went. I think how it went, from what I can piece together, and no one really knows, by the way, how this went.
That's the thing. Yeah, we're all speculating.
But I suspect how it went was that. Oh, look, these are really great, George. We'd like to buy them off you. Just adding that, we don't have to use these if we don't want to. I don't think it would have been. I think that George was led to believe that if he sold his story ideas, that they would be used. I think that's what happened, and that's why George was annoyed, which we'll get into as we further the story.
So obviously we got to this part where they bought the stories off George, and then it came to the time where George sat down with Kathleen, JJ, and another writer, and they were all introducing George to The Force Awakens, and they ended up giving him, I think it was a copy of the script, and George sat down, read it, and he was extremely disappointed that his story,
he was angry.
Not only did he didn't like the story, but his story that he sold was discarded. It was not mentioned at all. There was nothing from it or anything. So, I mean, Bob Iger says, and I have a quote here. He says, "I'd been so careful since our first conversation not to mislead him in any way, and I didn't think I had now, but I could have handled it a bit better. I should have prepared for him meeting with JJ and Michael and told him about our conversations, that we felt it was better to go in another direction. I could have talked through this with him and possibly avoided angering him by not surprising him." I mean, the thing is, right, I mean, there's more to add to this too. Pretty much, ever since George Lucas has felt betrayed, understandably too. I think, like you said, Roly, he was made to believe that his stories were going to play a major role in the development of this sequel trilogy, but they haven't played a role at all. The thing is George Lucas sold this sold this franchise knowing that Disney had every right to do whatever they wanted to do with it. That's the thing. He was paid a lot of money. It's just the way it goes. I'm not saying that I've liked what Disney has done with these movies, because to be quite frank, I haven't really been a big fan of the sequel trilogy. I'm willing to give episode 9 a shot by no means. I'm going to be there, midnight. We're both going to be there midnight.
Yeah, boy.
You know what I mean? But what I'm saying is that I feel like it was a little bit naive from George Lucas's end to think that Disney weren't going to do what they wanted to do, and that they probably could have, and that they probably were going to discard his story. I know it seems like that he was misled, but at the end of the day, he still sold those. He still sold those stories, and sometimes you just have to read that fine print.
Yeah, look, I think he did too. I just, it would be hard to watch your creation destroyed.
Yeah. It would.
I mean, I think too, if the reason why this is annoying is because what Disney did was they took his treatments, discarded them, proceeded to make their own trilogy of films, which have, like you just pointed out, up to this point, been largely a disappointment. And a big disappointment. I think there was a lot of decisions that have been made with political motivation behind them, and I don't think that's been for the best. And I think, for lack of a better word, the films we have now are trash.
Yeah, look, take it or leave it.
At least the trilogy films.
Yeah, take it or leave it. Like, these movies, whenever the fandom of Star Wars will never ever agree. There's obviously two sides to it. One really likes the sequel movies, or the other really hate these movies. I'm willing to obviously give Disney Star Wars a go, and I will say there has been a lot of good things to come out of Disney Star Wars. I'm absolutely loving the comics they're doing. I'm absolutely loving the books they're doing. I love the TV shows that they're doing. And from what we're seeing too, is that there is a positive future. We are having the Mandalorian coming out very, very soon. Also, I think it's very interesting to note the timing of this coming out. This is coming out before Episode 9. I think this what it actually does, and I think it was a bit of a smart move from Disney, is to get all negative PR out of the way with prior to the release of Episode 9. I think that's actually really good, because now they can only really go up from here, in my eyes anyway. But look, at the end of the day, it is sad to see, and we could all sit here and think what could have been with George Lucas if he was still at the helm of Lucasfilm. But at the end of the day, Disney are now at the helm. It is up to them to give us some great stories from these films. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I think George Lucas gave us the prequel trilogy, which we just reviewed.
Yeah.
And for me, none of those films score above a 6.5 out of 10. So I think that George Lucas's story ideas are really good, but his execution was what's off. So I think that if George Lucas is giving you story ideas, you should probably be humble enough to recognize that they're probably pretty good. Because George Lucas was at his best when he had other directors making his films and him doing the story.
Yeah.
He sold it, all that sort of stuff. I just wish Disney had moved in a different direction with it and actually involved him. I will say, actually, though, that apparently George Lucas has been pretty heavily involved with The Mandalorian and Jon Favreau.
Well, here's the thing.
Apparently he's being involved with Episode 9 as well.
Here's the thing, right, is that there's all this negative news that George Lucas isn't liking what Disney's doing. But you can't say that Disney isn't at least trying to work with George Lucas still, because it is seen that he has quite a bit of involvement with these current projects happening with Star Wars. So I like to think that, and I hope this is the case, that Disney, of course, still want to keep him in the circle of, and I think that's exactly what they're doing. But I think you're right. I think you hit the nail on the head, Roll. If George Lucas has any story ideas for Star Wars, you should absolutely take the opportunity to listen in when you can. You absolutely should. I mean, this is the guy who created Star Wars after all. About him, whether he would have gone on to create those three sequel films, he did say, I will take a quote out of this article, but Lucas commented on his plans for the sequels in 2018, as he told the trilogy was going to go into a microbiotic world, exploring a world of creatures that operate differently than we do. So he says, I call them the Wills, and the Wills are the ones who actually control the universe. They feed off the Force. If I had held on to the company, I could have done it, and then would have been done. Of course, a lot of fans would have hated it, just like they did Episode 1, Phantom Menace and everything, but at least the whole story from beginning to end would be told. I don't know. It's hard.
We should talk about what Lucas's feedback after seeing The Force Awakens. I think it's really interesting. He said to who screened the film? Was it Kathleen Kennedy? No, it was Bob Iger, wasn't it?
Bob Iger.
Yeah, Bob Iger screened the film for George Lucas before it came out in cinemas, The Force Awakens. And George's feedback on the film was that it didn't innovate enough technologically or visually, and I think that is a fair criticism.
And Bob Iger agreed with him, and he said that was true, that there wasn't enough.
He kind of agreed with him.
He said it with a backhand. I'll say that. He said it with a backhand. He was like, look, I agree with George, but he was like, I don't think George was understanding the amount of pressure that we had to release a Star Wars film that everyone would like.
Which is ridiculous because George Lucas himself had just been under a ridiculous amount of pressure with the prequel trilogy.
Absolutely.
Only a few years before. I think if anyone understands the pressure about releasing a good Star Wars film, it's George Lucas.
Yeah, hands down.
What a stupid thing to say.
Yeah. I think that was really shows a moment of weakness from Bob Iger.
I think it shows an arrogance.
Yeah, and that too. That's but look, I can see where both sides are coming from. I do feel bad for George Lucas, but like I said, at the end of the day, he did sell this franchise knowing full well that they could do what they wanted with it. That's the franchise itself. That separate transaction of the stories, that's a bit of a different kettle of fish. I think, he was made to believe that those stories were going to be used, and they weren't. So I feel sorry for George Lucas in that regard, that he had to sell his stories. And, it's hard to know that you've created something and then knowing that people who are going to continue creating that don't even want to use your ideas. That's hard to swallow.
Yeah.
That's
poor old Georgie.
Poor old George. But look, we're going to move on to our next piece of news now. That was pretty much the only piece of big news we had this week. But very quickly, I don't know if you're aware of this, role, but Triple Force Friday is coming up on October the 4th, which is Star Wars' retail event. So this happens pretty much about every year. I'd say biennial as we get a saga movie every 2 years, but pretty much it's Star Wars massive retail event. So all the new toys for Episode 9 will be coming out on October the 4th, and as you know, these toys and merchandise are going to lead to some massive leads.
Spoilers.
Going into Episode 9. So after this, we are going to learn a lot more about Episode 9. I don't know if you've heard. I think we're going to get a trailer pretty soon.
Yeah,
I think mid-October will be. I'm going to assume it's going to come about mid to late October. I hope it does. Sooner the better.
I think the Episode 8 trailer dropped mid-October.
Yeah,
late October.
Yeah. So look, that'll be really exciting though, and that's not too far away. It's only a couple Fridays away. So that'll be very, very exciting when it comes. So please stay tuned because we will be definitely delving into that.
I've got a piece of news.
Please drop it in.
Jedi Outcast, Jedi Knight 2 has just been released on the Nintendo Switch, and I think the PS4.
Yes,
as well.
It is on PlayStation Store as well.
So it actually came out today.
Today was it?
Yeah,
awesome.
And I played the first hour or so of it.
Yep,
it's really great. The story is, I've played through it before, but it's really solid. It's about a renegade stormtrooper who was training under Luke Skywalker at his Jedi Academy and sort of stopped. And after he's stopped using his Force powers, he's confronted by a Sith Lord and is left for dead after the Sith Lord attacks him, and then it's about him going back to the Academy and training as a Jedi again and getting his powers back. And I have to say that, like, seeing Luke Skywalker as this, Jedi master who's full of wisdom and giving instruction is really, really cool. And it's something that we didn't get to see in the films. And I was so wanting to see Luke be this awesome Jedi master. And it's really cool. So I recommend anyone who likes Star Wars and feels a bit cheated by The Last Jedi's portrayal of Luke Skywalker, I recommend you go and play this game because it's actually a really decent Star Wars story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's simple, but it's really well told.
Awesome. Definitely check it out.
Oh, and it's like $13.50.
I'll be getting it.
Cheap as.
See you there.
Sounds good.
Excellent. On to our next piece of news. We have a review of the Snoke Comic issue, Age of Resistance, issue 1 for Snoke. You and I went into the city the other day in our local comic book shop. Not really local, we had to travel. Unfortunately, in Brisbane, there's only really a couple comic book shops you can go to. But nonetheless, we went and bought a issue of this. Now, you know a little bit about the comic because you haven't read it all yet. I did get to sit down and read the whole thing. So I'll kind of recap on what happened. So it's pretty much what we saw in the preview for this comic. It's just, Snoke takes Kylo Ren to Dagobah to continue his training. Pretty much, it's showing a little bit of arrogance from Kylo Ren because they reminisce on Luke Skywalker training in the same cave as well. Snoke comes out and shows his respect for Luke Skywalker. But ultimately, Kylo Ren's quite arrogant, and he goes into the Force Cave, and he has a vision of Luke. He beats him, he slashes him down, and then the Force vision continues, showing his parents, Han and Leia, which is really cool. And then Snoke being outside the cave can sense what he's seeing. He can sense what's happening. So he's like, he has like a do it moment, he's telling him to slash his parents down, but Kylo Ren pretends to be having an aggro session, doesn't actually slash his parents down. He slashes like a rock down or something, and Snoke still thinks he's slashing his parents down. So he's having a bit of a draw to the light side there, which is kind of cool to see, I guess. And then
so sounds like they emphasize the conflict.
Yes, absolutely. It's about the conflict within him that he can't quite at that time come to kill his parents, unlike what he did killing Han Solo in Force Awakens. But that's pretty much where the comic ends. It ends with him completely blowing up the cave with the Force. And then Snoke's like, "Oh, why would you do that? I was going to bring my future apprentices to here." And then Kylo was like, "Oh, you won't need them." And then he has a bit of a smirk. So, Snoke likes seeing the power within Kylo Ren. But that's pretty much a recap of what actually happened in the comic. The actual comic itself and what I thought of it, I thought it was a cool comic. And certainly something that would have been cool to see in the movies. And it reminded me of when Snoke was at The Force Awakens. Snoke was saying, "I will continue Kylo Ren's training." And something we just haven't seen in the movies at all is Snoke and Kylo Ren training or anything like that. Like, what does that even mean? We won't even know now because Snoke's dead.
Flashbacks?
Flashbacks,
maybe?
I guess so. But that's what this comic essentially is, really. It's just a flashback to prior their training. But I will say this, it is meant to be a Snoke comic. It's not really a Snoke comic. I learnt nothing more than what I knew about him prior. I learnt more about Kylo Ren, and we're also getting a Kylo Ren issue, which comes out tomorrow. So as far as being labeled a Snoke comic, not really. I don't learn anything new about him, which is disappointing because he'd be an interesting character to know. But in saying that, I have a feeling that they're holding off on telling any good stories in him, given that we are still out from the Episode 9 release.
Snoke is Palpatine.
Yeah, so who knows? Snoke, maybe Palpatine was, I don't know, taking over his body or something. He's just like this evil soul in the universe. I'm still on this theory that he, with the ring, made from that Snoke's ring, which is made beneath Vader's castle. there's something about that ring. There's got to be some sort of significance. And if there's not something about it in episode 9, I'm gonna be like, what the hell?
They won't be.
It's so disappointing. Because I don't understand why because they don't explain anything about it in the movie, obviously.
Do you know why? Do you know why you don't understand why? Because Rian Johnson doesn't understand why. He has no good reasons for anything that happened in episode 8 other than to try and subvert your expectations. So
true.
Imagine being poor old J.J. Abrams. And
I feel bad for him still because the guy has so much to answer for, and it's literally impossible to satisfy every single story plot created in episode 8 in episode 9. So I feel bad for JJ. I really do, because expectations for every single Star Wars fan is sky high, I think. But yeah, Snoke Comic, it was a cool read. It was cool to see Kylo Ren train with Snoke. But yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah,
it's cool. And yeah, like I said, the Kylo Ren issue is coming out on the 25th. And we also have a Knights of Ren comic coming out in December.
Awesome.
That'll actually be really good too, because we'll actually, as well as in episode 9, and I fear that we're going to get very little screen time of Knights of Ren in favor for other boring story plots. I hope not, but I've just got a feeling. So that'll be really cool to see when it comes out in December. Hopefully we'll learn more about the Knights of Ren in episode 9, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Well, they were the coolest part of The Force Awakens. They were like hinted at, but man, their design looked awesome. I hope
they're just very much like a Boba Fett character. Like, you don't know anything about them. In fact, we don't know anything about them at all, apart from the fact that they're just with Kylo Ren. So
Come on, JJ.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
Do something cool with them.
It was his idea in The Force Awakens. Let's just hope he can do something with them in episode 9.
JJ's a good director.
I like JJ Abrams.
Yeah.
I do. He's a cool guy. So I think he's gonna bring it home.
I think he's gonna try. Have you seen the rumors around the fact that they want to use Emperor Palpatine in the next Star Wars trilogy as well?
Which trilogy?
The trilogy to follow this one.
Really?
Really? There's rumors. I mean, there's rumors about everything, but
I've heard rumors that apparently this movie will change your perspective on Return of the Jedi when Emperor Palpatine's meant to die.
Who said that?
I've just had rumors.
Disney. I swear to God, Disney puts they must have an office dedicated.
Half of these rumors out there.
Oh, they would,
and they've just put dummy rumors out there too.
Why not?
That'd be awesome.
Yeah,
good on them.
I really do hope we get a trailer in October. We need to know more about this film.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is actually we'll do an episode purely on just what we need and what we expect from episode 9. I think
we should do a trailer review.
We'll do a trailer review too when it comes out. Hopefully it will be out in the next few weeks, but who knows? Have to wait and see. Well, guys, that pretty much wraps it up. Thank you for tuning in again. And also, if you haven't checked it, make sure you go check out episode 3, Revenge of the Sith review. That is up and ready to go for you to listen. We also have Attack of the Clones and Phantom Menace review up if you haven't listened to that as well. Our next review is going to be Solo. Make sure you check that out. That'll be our next podcast.
Looking forward to this one.
That one will be a lot of fun to watch. Don't think I've watched in a while, but yeah, no, that'll be good too. So stay tuned for that. If you haven't already, make sure you go follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Starbros Podcast, and Instagram @Starbros Podcast.
Do it.
Give in to your hatred.
Execute Order 66.
Execute Order social media.
You're too good at that.
All right, guys. We'll see you next time.